You hold the ship's articles in your hand, a promise of equal shares in every crate of sugar and every barrel of rum. Behind the romance of no prey, no base sits a brutal ledger. A pirate ship was not a floating utopia. It was a high-risk startup where the product was survival. The wages were plunder, and the largest expense of all was human life. And most of these ventures ended not in treasure, but in ruin. You see the freedom of the open sea. But the economics tell a different story of depreciation and mounting liability. You are the captain, responsible for turning a stolen asset into a profitable enterprise, while your creditors, the crew, demand dividends for every hour of labor. If you fail to find a prize, the social debt of these unpaid shares accumulates faster than the wind can fill your sails. You are floating on a clock that only ticks toward insolvency. But look closer at the hull. The wood is rotting, the supplies are spoiling, and the democratic consensus is fraying under the pressure of 3 weeks without a capture. The romance of the free pirate life masked the reality of a starving, highly leveraged venture that required constant infusions of stolen goods to avoid total collapse. A pirate ship was not a treasure-filled utopia. It was a high-risk startup where the primary product was survival and the primary expense was human life. This is not an accident. It is the business model. Every day the hull stays dry, the social debt of those promised shares grows. Yet the stock of food and gunpowder only shrinks. Today we strip away the myth to examine the actual, unforgiving ledger of a pirate vessel. The ledger doesn't care about your reputation as a scourge of the seas. You face a crushing overhead that persists regardless of your success. You must account for every barrel of flour and the maintenance of every cannon. Yet your only reliable revenue is the unpredictable haul of a merchant vessel. This isn't just about the scarcity of prey. It is about a singular hidden liability that bleeds a crew dry before they ever glimpse a prize. So what is the true nature of this machine you are commanding? That machine is a vessel of wood and iron that demands constant, punishing reinvestment just to keep from sinking. You are rarely the owner of a pristine craft. More often, you inherit a ship through mutiny, or by seizing a prize that is already functionally exhausted. In that moment, you stop being a captain and become a manager of decaying assets. If you acquire a ship by force, you are not inheriting a clean slate. You are inheriting the previous owner's maintenance failures, a hull that has spent years absorbing salt and rot, and a list of structural compromises the previous crew was too underfunded to repair. The alternative is the organized cruise, a venture that requires significant upfront capital from backers, who expect a return long before you ever see a horizon. You cannot sail without a medicine chest, tons of gunpowder, shot, cordage, and a specialized kit of tools for the carpenter and gunner. These are not items you find on the deck of a passing merchantman. They are manufactured goods that require hard liquid capital to procure before you set sail. If you cannot secure these supplies, your enterprise is dead in the water before the first broadside is fired, so you balance the books on 2 very different paths: the seized hull with its inherited repair liabilities, or the financed cruise with its crushing initial debt. In either case, your daily existence becomes a race to extract value from a platform that is actively losing its own utility. To understand why most of these ventures broke so rapidly, we have to calculate the cost of the door itself. What are you actually paying for the privilege of putting your ship to sea? The cost of the door is not a static sum you pay once. It is a weight that drags against your bottom line from the very first hour. If you start with a captured vessel, you inherit hidden liabilities that would make a logistics manager weep. The hull is barnacle-crusted and rotting beneath the waterline. The standing rigging is frayed, and the sails are patched with material that has long since lost its integrity. You are already in the red before you clear the harbor. If you choose the organized cruise funded by backers, you face an equally demanding reality. You are signing on to an upfront capital requirement that dwarfs any personal savings a common sailor could accumulate. To outfit a ship for a serious, sustained voyage, you must commit an investment equal to decades of a common laborer's wages. Think about the scale. This is more than 15 years of full-time labor for a skilled craftsman, all converted into materials that you will either consume, lose in a fight, or watch decay in the humid Caribbean air. This is the inventory you must secure before you ever chase a single merchant ship. You need tons of gunpowder, which is notoriously temperamental. It absorbs moisture and loses its explosive force in weeks if it is not kept in perfectly dry conditions that are essentially impossible to maintain at sea. You need thousands of pounds of iron shot, miles of high-quality hemp cordage, and a medicine chest worth several years of a sailor's potential earnings. You need heavy saws, chisels, and caulking irons for the constant hull maintenance you will perform while anchored in some secluded bay, hiding from naval patrols. Every pound of biscuit, every gallon of drinking water, and every roll of linen is a fixed cost already spent. If you are not constantly capturing new supplies to replace what you burn, you are cannibalizing your own enterprise. This relentless decay is the primary engine of your eventual insolvency. You operate in a world where every delay creates an immediate, compounding tax on your fixed provisions, yet your crew has no wage, no base pay, and no guarantee of a return on their risk. They live entirely on the promise of future loot. And that raises the real tension. How do you carry all this upfront cost while the men themselves are gambling their lives on credit? Every soul aboard has effectively signed an unsecured, high-risk loan. When a hand joins your crew, they are not merely signing away their labor for a future promise. They are providing capital in the form of their own lives, and you are the debtor. Every day the horizon stays empty, the pressure of this arrangement mounts. Because your crew is both your labor force and your primary creditor, your leadership is not dictated by a company charter or a distant board. It is dictated by the biting reality of the empty belly. Under the Articles, the distribution is fixed, yet the dividend is perpetually missing. This democratic structure keeps the crew invested in the venture, but it inherently treats time as a liability. Reference the real systems. The captain and quartermaster drew extra shares as a premium for carrying the highest risk, while ordinary hands drew single shares that represented nothing but hope. When you operate 3 weeks without a capture, the men are not just hungry. They are watching their personal, speculative equity evaporate into the salt air. Their frustration is not an emotional reaction to a bad streak. It is a cold calculation of a vanishing return on investment. This is the fundamental mechanism of the pirate startup, and it forces a question about combat itself. Why are your own tactics becoming a liability to the very ledger you are trying to keep in the black? Combat, for you, is a management failure. Every time a cannon fires, you are literally burning the assets you risked your life to acquire. This is not the swashbuckling theater of popular imagination. It is a cold effort to preserve a revenue stream that already hangs by a thread. Consider the physical cost. A broadside into the hull of your target ruins the wood, tears the rigging, and risks sinking the very cargo you intended to sell. If you kill the men on that merchant ship, you destroy the chance of a peaceful surrender and force a prolonged, costly engagement that leaves your own ship battered, your gunpowder spent, and your crew exhausted. You have no shipyards and no spare parts beyond what you steal. The most successful captains were not the most violent. They were the most intimidating. By hoisting a terrifying flag or firing a single warning shot across a bow, you aim for a total, bloodless capitulation. This saves your precious shot and powder, spares your ship from damage you cannot mend, and keeps the crew you must feed alive to earn their share. and every death among your own men is a compounding disaster. You lose a set of hands you already invested in. Yet your fixed supply of food and the work of keeping the ship afloat remain exactly the same. The loss of a crewman does not reduce your overhead. It raises the per-man tax on every survivor. So walk the logic to its end. If you fight, you lose. If you damage the cargo, you lose. If you kill the labor force you need to offload the goods, you lose. Read that again. The ferocious pirate of legend was, in cold economic terms, a risk-averse manager who could not afford the overhead of a victory. Your product is perishable. Your vessel is a depreciating liability, and your entire management style must stay locked on the lowest cost capture possible. Your next task is to reconcile that grand strategy with the precise arithmetic of what remains in your locker when the smoke clears. You need to see how the decay of a single barrel of powder can turn an entire season from a business venture into a desperate, empty-handed flight. The moisture in the Caribbean air is a silent creditor that never sleeps. When you stow 1,500 pounds of gunpowder in a humid hold, you are watching a store of currency dissolve into useless, damp gray sludge. Each day it sits, the powder loses its bite, and you are forced to choose between a failed engagement and a dangerous, long-range gamble with weakened shot. Either way, the cost of that wasted investment stays on the books. The weight of your overhead grows again when you factor in human capital. If 5 of your 100 men die of fever, your costs do not fall by 5%. The medicine, the food, and the maintenance all continue. But now they are divided among 95 men instead of 100. Every death raises the share of the fixed burden carried by every survivor. It is a tax that compounds each time you fail to secure a fresh prize. Then there is the cargo itself. You dream of gold, but the hold is almost always filled with bulk goods: sugar, cocoa, tobacco, or linen. These are high-volume, heavy, low-value assets that demand an immediate buyer. Every day you spend hunting for a port willing to trade with a pirate, your stores keep burning. So you sell in haste, accepting prices well below true value just to keep the venture from going dark. It is a fire sale held under a ticking clock. And inside the cabin, democratic management adds another hidden loss. Your articles promise an equal share of every crate. But before the quartermaster can even log a prize, hands are pocketing goods. This theft within theft shrinks the divisible pool long before the final tally is calculated. That sounds minor until you actually run the numbers, because it forces the ship to stay at sea longer to reach the same break-even point, which burns still more of the stores you were trying to protect. You are running a business where the primary product is survival, and you cannot scale it. You cannot dock at a neutral harbor. You cannot secure low-cost financing. You cannot repair your hull without spending days of labor. You cannot spare. The deeper you look into the ledger, the clearer it becomes that the decay of the ship is mirrored by the decay of the mission. This brings you to the hardest question of all. How much longer can you keep moving before the geography of trade itself decides your fate? Your vessel is aging, and the Atlantic is closing its doors. As the 1710s and 20s progressed, the maritime world shifted. European powers stopped treating piracy as an occasional nuisance and began treating it as a direct assault on the state. They answered with the one tool that reliably kills a high-overhead venture: the armed, state-sanctioned convoy. Trade routes that were once thin, vulnerable lines on your map became heavily guarded corridors when targets travel wrapped in naval protection. The danger of a raid outpaces the value of the goods inside. You face a simple math problem. Your business requires a high rate of successful captures to keep the ship, the crew, and the hunger at bay. But the risk of losing your entire asset in a single naval encounter now makes that gamble statistically ruinous. Violence was always a cost you could not afford. Now the environment makes avoiding violence just as costly. If you chase a protected merchantman, you burn stores and powder you cannot replace. If you retreat, you burn those same stores while feeding 100 idle mouths. You are trapped in a pincer of fixed costs and shrinking opportunity. The crew sees this as clearly as you do. Their promised shares of sugar and spice never materialize, because every potential prize is now a dangerous, low-reward risk. They are unpaid creditors, holding a debt you have no way to service, and as the months of capture drought stretch on, that debt becomes the fuel for mutiny. They are not lazy. They are workers calculating that the risk to reward of your enterprise has hit zero. This leaves you to face the final accounting of a voyage that has simply run out of road. What happens when you force yourself to strike the last balance on your remaining shares? You stand on the deck of a captured medium merchantman, its hold filled with cocoa, spices, and heavy bolts of linen. Your crew of 100 has succeeded. Now you must confront the ledger. Once the gross value of the cargo is totaled, the articles demand a rigid distribution, and it happens in a fixed order. First, the surgeon collects a set fee for the voyage. Next, the public stock is drained to compensate the men who lost limbs in the boarding, pulling directly from the pool before anyone earns a coin. Then the multipliers activate. The captain and quartermaster draw their extra shares, followed by the boatswain and master gunner with their portions. Only what survives all of that is divided among the ordinary seamen. Here is what that leaves. This was a good capture, and the voyage ran roughly 6 months. By the time the plunder reaches the ordinary sailor, his single share works out to something near 3 months of a common craftsman's wages on land. Sit with that. For half a year at sea, half a year of storms, disease, and the constant risk of the noose, the average man earned what a tradesman back in port earned in 3 months of ordinary work. On the best possible outcome, a successful voyage paid roughly half of what staying home and taking honest wages would have paid. That is the dream fully realized. Now run the voyage that actually happened more often. A naval blockade forces you to drift for weeks without a prize. A damp season spoils a third of your powder, so the one prize you do corner nearly slips away. Your burn rate does not pause for any of it. The crew still eats. The hull still rots. The injured still draw their compensation. When you finally strike the balance, the haul is smaller and the deductions are the same, so the ordinary sailor's share barely covers a single month of the rations he already ate getting there. He has worked 6 months, risked his life daily, and finished poorer than the day he signed the articles. This was not a rare disaster. As the 1720s wore on, it became the ordinary result, because the reward for a lone, rotting vessel had dropped below the cost of simply keeping the hull afloat. Your crew was not lazy, and they were not beaten by the Royal Navy in open battle. They were forced out of business by an unavoidable ratio. The capital required to keep a ship seaworthy exceeded the plunder a lone crew could reliably take from a protected market. You are holding a ledger that can no longer be balanced. The answer lies in the harsh physics of the sea. When the prize money is gone, within a month, you are back to the same debt you began with. Piracy in the Golden Age was a high-frequency, high-depreciation venture that collapsed under its own overhead the moment the trade winds shifted. You were never a merchant prince. You were the manager of an underfunded, dying machine, and the debt always outpaced the plunder. The ledger at sea is unforgiving, and eventually the math catches up with every captain. In the brutal economics of the Golden Age, the only real winner was the sea itself, which claimed the hull and the debt alike. This video is for education and entertainment. It is not financial, legal, or investment advice.